The Quiet Boy with Big Dreams. In a quiet corner of India, in a modest two-room apartment in Chennai, a boy named Sundar sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at a faded world map pinned above his bed. His eyes traced the borders of distant lands, America, Germany, Japan, and he wondered what lay beyond the colored lines. He didn't have many toys. His father, an electrical engineer, often came home tired, but never too tired to answer his son's endless questions. "Appa," Sundar asked one night, "how does a satellite work?" His father smiled and began explaining with a pencil and paper. Sundar listened, his eyes shining, even though he didn't fully understand everything. To him, learning wasn't a task, it was magic. But life wasn't easy. Their family had just enough to survive. Sundar studied under the dim light of a kerosene lamp when power went out, which happened more than he could count. Yet he never complained. He walked miles to school each day, carrying his bag full of borrowed books, some pages torn, some stained, but each one precious to him. Teachers noticed his quiet nature, but they also saw something else. A spark, a hunger. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was with thoughtful precision. One teacher, Mr. Raghavan, once told the class, "Some of you speak loudly and forget tomorrow." Sundar speaks rarely, but we remember his words. Still, Sundar didn't stand out in the way others did. He wasn't the loudest or the most confident. He didn't come from money or privilege. He wore hand-me-down uniforms and often sat alone, deep in thought. But he had a dream. He wanted to understand the world. Not just how it worked, but why it worked the way it did. When Sundar was 15, something happened that would change his path forever. During a class science fair, Sundar built a small working model of a public water filtration system using scraps, soda bottles, and wires his father had discarded from old radios. When he presented it, a few students snickered. It looked too simple, unimpressive. "Looks like a toy," one classmate laughed. But Sundar calmly explained how it could purify water in poor villages using natural gravity. He didn't raise his voice. He just showed how it worked. The science teacher, impressed, invited a local university professor to see it. The professor examined the model, then looked at Sundar. "Did you design this on your own?" "Yes, sir." "Have you ever heard of Stanford University?" Sundar shook his head. "You should, and you should aim for it." That night, Sundar couldn't sleep. The name Stanford echoed in his mind, a place far away in another country, where great minds built the future. But dreams weren't free. His family had no money to send him abroad. Even university in India would be hard. But Sundar wasn't the kind to give up. He studied harder. Every night, after helping his mother cook and cleaning up after dinner, he sat at his desk with borrowed books and solved math problems until dawn. Sometimes, he nodded off with a pencil in hand, only to wake up and continue where he left off. His school principal took notice and nominated him for a scholarship. It didn't cover everything, but it was enough to get him into the Indian Institute of Technology, one of the most prestigious colleges in the country. When Sundar received the acceptance letter, he didn't jump or shout. He simply held it to his chest, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." But the real challenges were yet to come, mocked in the crowd, but chosen by fate. The entrance gates of the Indian Institute of Technology stood tall and proud, buzzing with dreams, energy, and a kind of pressure only the best of the best could feel. Sundar stepped through those gates with a worn-out backpack and a heart full of hope. His father had packed a small lunch for him that morning, rice and pickle wrapped in banana leaf. His mother gave him a quiet hug, and his younger brother waved goodbye, eyes wide with admiration. Sundar didn't say much, but inside, he promised himself he would not waste this chance. It was a different world. Here, students wore branded shoes, carried laptops, spoke English like it was their first language, and quoted science papers he hadn't even heard of. Sundar quickly realized he was different, not just in background, but in presence. He was quiet, humble, and still adjusting to the speed at which the world moved here. His first class was a seminar on computational design. When he raised his hand to ask a question, his voice cracked slightly. "Sir, how does the algorithm decide the shortest path?" A few students snickered behind him. "Bro, is this guy from a village?" one whispered. Sundar heard it. He felt his ears burn. But he didn't respond. Instead, he listened carefully to the professor's answer. He took notes. He studied that concept all night. He didn't have the sharpest clothes or the smoothest accent. He couldn't afford a computer, so he borrowed time in the campus lab, sometimes waiting in line for hours just to get 30 minutes of access. But what he lacked in resources, he made up for in something the others didn't see yet: focus. There was a moment, 2 weeks into the semester, that tested him deeply. A famous tech entrepreneur from the US was visiting the campus to speak to the students. Sundar sat quietly in the last row of the auditorium, scribbling notes as the speaker talked about innovation, disruption, and bold thinking. The guest paused and asked the audience, "What is the biggest obstacle to innovation in poor countries?" Students raised their hands. Lack of funding. Bad infrastructure. Slow internet. The speaker nodded to each, somewhat unimpressed. Then he looked to the back. "What about you, the quiet one in the back row?" Sundar looked up, surprised. The spotlight had landed on him, literally. He stood slowly, nervous. His voice was soft. "Sir, I think the biggest obstacle is when people are taught to memorize answers instead of ask questions." There was a pause. Some students laughed under their breath. But the speaker's expression changed. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "Say that again." Sundar cleared his throat. "We are trained to pass exams, not to think freely. We need to change how we learn." This time, the room went quiet, completely silent. The speaker nodded. "What's your name?" "Sundar." "Sundar Pichai." The billionaire guest turned to the audience. "You see this young man. That answer, that mindset, is the future, not just marks, but meaning." Students who laughed before suddenly looked at Sundar with new eyes. The spotlight shifted. For the first time in that elite room, he was not the invisible boy from Chennai. He was the one who had changed the conversation. After the seminar, the guest asked Sundar to meet him privately. They sat outside under a neem tree. "Sundar," the man said, "have you ever thought of studying abroad?" Sundar looked at the ground. "I've heard of it, but I don't think it's possible." "Why not?" "I can't afford it." The man smiled. "You don't need money. You need belief. Apply. I'll write your recommendation letter." Sundar couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? He went back to his dorm that night, opened a borrowed laptop, and typed in one word into the search engine: Stanford. The university that once seemed like a distant planet now felt reachable. He applied. He waited. And weeks later, an email arrived. He had been accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship. His hands trembled. He walked outside the dorm, looked at the stars, and whispered, "Thank you." The boy who crossed the ocean with a dream. The airplane window framed a strange new world. Clouds floated beneath like soft waves, and the sky above was endless blue. Sundar Pichai, now 22, sat quietly in his seat, clutching a second-hand backpack and a small brown diary that held his notes, ideas, and dreams. As the plane touched down in San Francisco, his fingers tightened around the armrest. Everything ahead was unknown. New country, new people, new life. He had never left India before. Now he was thousands of miles from home, landing in a place where he had no family, no money, no safety net. Just a scholarship and a belief in learning. Outside the airport, the cold wind hit him like a slap. He had never felt anything like it. He pulled his only sweater tighter around him and waited for the shuttle to Stanford. The campus, when he arrived, was massive and bright, with clean paths, green lawns, and buildings that seemed to touch the sky. He walked slowly, eyes wide, Heart pounding. It didn't feel real. Could someone like him really belong here? His dorm room was shared. His roommate, Brian, was friendly but confused. "You've never used email before?" Brian asked. Sundar shook his head. "No computer at home. I use paper and libraries." Brian stared. "Wow. But you're at Stanford." Sundar smiled softly. "I learned fast." And he did. He spent hours at the computer lab, catching up. He read not just textbooks, but online forums, programming guides, and research papers. He barely slept. Some nights, his hands cramped from typing. But he didn't stop. At first, he struggled to speak up in class. His accent was strong, his voice quiet. Some professors spoke so fast, he couldn't follow. But he recorded lectures and replayed them again and again until he understood every word. He made friends slowly. One of them, Emily, noticed how focused he was. "You're like a machine, Sundar. Don't you ever rest?" "I rest when I understand," he replied. Then came a turning point. In a seminar about human-computer interaction, the professor asked the students to design a simple user interface idea, something that could make tech easier for everyday people. Many students created colorful designs with animations and complex features. Sundar's idea was different. Simple, clean. He drew a plain search bar on a white page. No distractions, no pop-ups, no overload. Just a space to ask anything. He called it Focus First Design. Some classmates laughed. "Looks boring," one said. But the professor leaned in. "This is brilliant." "Why?" asked another student. "Because people don't want features. They want answers." That one design became Sundar's obsession. He explored the psychology behind human attention. He wrote essays. He tested prototypes. He even built a working demo with a small team of classmates who believed in his idea. Word spread. And one day, someone from a small but fast-growing tech company came to campus. The recruiter stood at the front of the lecture hall and said, "We're looking for people who understand simplicity, people who think not just about code, but about users." Emily nudged Sundar. "That's you." He didn't believe it, but he applied. He went to the interview in his only formal shirt, slightly wrinkled, and shoes that had walked the dusty streets of Chennai. The interviewer asked him to solve a coding challenge. Sundar did. Then they asked him, "Why do you want to work with us?" He paused. "Because your products reach billions, and I want to make sure those billions don't feel small when they use them." The room went silent. One of the interviewers wrote something down. "Thank you, Sundar. We'll be in touch." A week later, he got the call. He was hired. At Google, the quiet engineer who saved the day. Google's headquarters in Mountain View, California, felt like something out of a science fiction novel to Sundar. Glass walls, colorful open spaces, people on scooters zipping through the corridors, and cafeterias filled with food he'd never tasted before. His first day, Sundar quietly sat through orientation, barely speaking, just observing. While others introduced themselves with big smiles and confident handshakes, Sundar simply said, "Hi, I'm Sundar. I like simple design." His manager, July, gave him a corner desk and said, "Just watch for a while. Things move fast here." And things did. Projects came and went like waves. Engineers brainstormed furiously. Teams worked day and night on products that would be used by millions, maybe billions, of people. Sundar kept his head down and did his part. Coding, fixing bugs, testing features. For months, he worked quietly, unnoticed by most, yet never missing a deadline. He often stayed after others left, walking the hallways at night, thinking. He noticed something strange. Everyone was obsessed with building bigger features, more buttons, more pop-ups, more animations. But no one asked, what do users really want? He remembered his design from Stanford, the plain search bar, the clean page, Wasn't that what people loved about Google in the first place? He wrote down one sentence in his notebook. Simplicity is not the opposite of innovation, it is the heart of it. One afternoon, during a big internal meeting, something unexpected happened. A senior manager stood before the room with a serious face. Our new toolbar update has failed. Gasps, silence. Millions of users are uninstalling it. Negative feedback is pouring in. We need to fix this fast, or we risk losing trust. Sundar watched as experienced engineers began throwing out complex solutions, redesigns, extra layers, temporary fixes. He raised his hand. For a second, no one noticed. Then July nodded. Yes, Sundar. His voice was calm. Maybe the problem is that we added too much. Maybe users just want to search. Maybe we should go back to basics. Someone in the back scoffed. That's too naive. We need more features, not less. Sundar didn't argue. He opened his laptop and pulled up a test version he'd been quietly working on in his own time. It was a new design. Simple. One search box, one logo, a clean interface. This is what I believe people want, he said. A long silence followed. Then Julie leaned forward. Show us how it works. Sundar typed in a question. How to make tea without milk. Results appeared instantly. No loading delay. No distraction. Just what the user asked for. People started nodding. This is clean. Feels fast. It respects the user. That night, they uploaded Sundar's version to a small test group. By morning, the feedback was overwhelming. Users loved it. Within a week, the new design went live for everyone. It became the new face of Google search. And Sundar, he went from being the quiet guy in the corner to the one whose idea had saved the most important product of the company. His manager invited him into her office. You've done something big, she said. Sundar smiled. I just wanted to help. Word spread. Executives took notice. The CEO invited Sundar to speak at the next leadership meeting. Tell us, he said, how did you know simplicity would win? Sundar paused for a moment. Because where I come from, people don't have time for confusion. They want answers. Fast. Clearly. With respect. That's what technology should do. Applause. And just like that, the boy from Chennai, who once studied by kerosene light, was now being called the rising star of Google. But Sundar didn't let it change him. He still wore the same type of shirts, still brought lunch from home sometimes, still took notes in his little brown diary. One evening, he got a message from a university back in India. They wanted him to speak to their students, young minds who still studied in classrooms with broken fans and chalkboards filled with formulas. Sundar agreed. When he stood on that stage in front of hundreds of eager students, he looked around and saw himself in every face. You don't need a powerful voice to be heard, he said. You don't need fancy things to change the world. You just need one clear idea, and the courage to believe in it. The students cheered, not because he was famous, but because he was proof that dreams could cross oceans. When he returned to Google, something else was waiting for him. A new opportunity. One that would test everything he had learned. The impossible idea no one believed in. Sundar Pichai sat by the window of his office, looking out at the golden California sunset. The search redesign had been a quiet revolution. Users loved it. Executives applauded it. His name now appeared on internal reports and quarterly reviews. Yet inside, Sundar remained the same, calm, focused, and curious. But success had brought something else too. Attention. One morning, his manager entered with a folder and a serious look. Sundar, she said, there's something unusual. She placed the folder on his desk. Inside were pages of notes and drafts about an idea, one so big, yet so uncertain that it had been rejected twice by other leaders. It was called Chrome, a new web browser. They want you to lead it, she said. Sundar blinked. But we already have browsers. Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari. People won't change. That's what they said. That's why no one's touched it. He opened the notes. The idea was bold. Build a browser that was fast, clean, and designed with users in mind from the ground up. Not just another software tool, but something that could reshape how the internet worked. Sundar's hands shook slightly as he turned the pages. "Why me?" he asked softly. She smiled. "Because you don't think like them." But it wasn't going to be easy. The moment word got out that Sundar was leading the Chrome project, whispers began. It's a waste of time. Microsoft owns the browser market. Even Google's own engineers doubt it. In meetings, other managers questioned him. What's your plan? What makes this different? How do you expect people to switch? Sundar didn't argue. He listened, took notes, nodded politely. Then he returned to his team, a small group of engineers, some fresh out of college, some who had failed on other projects, and he said something that stayed with them forever. We're not building a browser. We're building trust. They looked confused. He explained, people don't want just features. They want safety, speed, stability, simplicity. We'll give them that. The next year was hard. Days blurred into nights. Bugs piled up. The first version crashed more than it worked. One engineer quit. Another almost gave up. But Sundar didn't shout. He never blamed. He sat beside them, wrote code, tested features, cleaned up messy lines of programming, brought them coffee, reminded them why they started. Slowly, Chrome began to take shape. One night, around 2 a.m., Sundar pushed his chair back and stared at the browser window they had built. It loaded in less than a second. Clean. No ads. No clutter. He whispered, "This is it." When the day came to present it to the board, Sundar walked into the room holding nothing but a USB stick. No slides. No hype. Just the product. He plugged it in. The browser launched. He typed in "how to dream big." Instant results. The room was quiet. Then someone said, "It's fast." Another added, "It feels different." But a billionaire investor on the board, known for his sharp opinions, leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "You're betting on a browser," he said, laughing. "That's not innovation. That's imitation." Sundar looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. "Sir," he said softly, "this isn't just a browser. It's a window to knowledge, to connection, to the future, and we've built it for everyone, not just the tech experts." The room went quiet again. This time, no one laughed. They launched Chrome quietly, like a whisper in a storm. But within months, users began to switch. Slowly at first. Then suddenly, Chrome became the fastest-growing browser in the world. Millions downloaded it, then hundreds of millions. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was just what Sundar always believed technology should be, helpful. As the download numbers soared, Sundar didn't throw parties or give speeches. He just called his father back in Chennai. "Appa," he said, "remember the first time we fixed the radio together?" His father laughed. "Yes. This is like that," Sundar said, "but for the world." His father didn't understand the full meaning, but he understood the pride in his son's voice. The panel where he was supposed to stay silent. Success was never supposed to feel lonely. But as Chrome climbed to the top of global browser charts, Sundar Pichai found himself walking through crowded Google halls with more stares than smiles. His name was now whispered in powerful circles. The shy engineer who once sat in the back row had become the face of quiet innovation. Tech blogs wrote about him. Universities quoted him. And inside Google, executives began inviting him to bigger rooms, rooms where strategy was whispered, not shouted. Some welcomed him. Others didn't. There were those who saw Sundar's humility as a threat to their style, those who measured success by volume, not values. But Sundar didn't change. He still showed up on time, still helped junior engineers, still paused to hold doors open for people who never knew his title. Then came the invitation that would test him in a new way. A global technology summit in San Francisco. Some of the world's biggest voices in business and innovation were attending. Billionaires, founders, CEOs, and among the invited speakers, Sundar Pichai. At first, he considered declining. Public speaking wasn't his comfort zone, but a message from his mother changed his mind. She texted, "When your thoughts can help others, they're no longer just yours." He agreed. The day of the summit arrived. The auditorium was massive, cameras everywhere. The panel was titled, "The Future of Education and Innovation." On the panel were 5 men, 4 billionaires in suits and Sundar, wearing his regular blazer and soft expression. The moderator introduced each speaker. When it was Sundar's turn, a few people in the audience whispered, "That's the chrome guy. He's the quiet one, right?" Then the moderator posed a question that would change everything. Do you believe education is still the most important tool for innovation? One billionaire chuckled first. "I never needed school," he said. "I dropped out. Real success doesn't come from books. It comes from instinct." The crowd laughed. Another added, "Yeah, kids these days waste years in classrooms instead of building companies." More applause. Sundar stayed silent until the moderator turned to him. "Mr. Pichai, your thoughts?" He looked at the crowd. He looked at the billionaires. And then he said something soft, but sharp enough to pierce the noise. "Education isn't just about degrees. It's about dignity." The room went still. Sundar continued, "I came from a place where we shared one phone for the entire building, where electricity failed more than it worked. But even when the lights went out, my parents lit a candle so I could study." He looked directly at the billionaire who had laughed. "I respect your path," Sundar said, "but not everyone has the luxury to take risks. Education is the only path for some of us, the only way to believe we matter." People leaned forward. "We talk about innovation like it belongs to those who can afford it," Sundar added, "but some of the greatest ideas are born in places without Wi-Fi, without laptops, just a book, a pencil, and a stubborn dream." One woman in the front row wiped her eyes. "You asked if education still matters," Sundar said. "It does, not just because it teaches us how to build things, but because it teaches us to build ourselves." There was silence. Then a wave of applause. Not the polite kind, but the kind that grows and rises, unstoppable. The billionaire who had laughed earlier tried to reply, "Well, I didn't mean." But the crowd was no longer listening to him. They were listening to Sundar. The clip of his words went viral within hours. Education isn't about degrees. It's about dignity. News outlets called it the moment a quiet man spoke louder than money. Students around the world shared it. Schools played it during assemblies. And back in Chennai, his old school hung a photo of Sundar at the entrance gate, with a sign that read, "He once walked here, now the world listens." After the summit, Sundar didn't go to a party or a press interview. He went home, sat quietly, opened his old brown notebook. On one of the pages, long ago, he had written, "One day, I want to speak for those who are never heard." He smiled, because today, he had the boy who became a voice for billions. Years had passed since Sundar picked his first day at Google. The same man who once fixed radios with his father in a small Chennai apartment now walked through the halls of one of the most powerful companies on earth. But he had not changed. His clothes were still simple, his tone still calm, his words still careful, and his heart still rooted in the values that brought him here: humility, clarity, and quiet courage. After the summit speech went viral, Sundar received messages from across the world. A girl from a village in Kenya wrote, "I play your speech when I walk to school. It makes me believe I can be more." A teacher in Brazil messaged, "Your words helped my students understand why learning matters, even when they don't see results yet." And back home in Chennai, his mother cried when a local newspaper called her son India's silent hero. But something unexpected followed. An email. Simple. No subject. Short. It came from the chairman of Google's board. "We would like to speak to you about the future of this company." Sundar sat still for a long moment. Then he closed his laptop, stepped outside, and looked up at the stars, just like he used to do as a boy. The future. In the meeting that followed, they offered him the position of CEO. A moment most would have shouted for, posted about, celebrated publicly. But Sundar said just one thing. "I need one day." He took a flight back to India that evening, alone. No assistants, no suits, no cameras. He visited his old school the next morning. Nothing had changed. The same chalkboards, the same metal benches, the same dusty windows. But the students looked up when he entered, wide-eyed, some whispering, "That's Sundar Pichai." The principal greeted him with trembling hands and tears in his eyes. "I used to write your name on the board during exams," he said. "You made us proud, Sundar." Sundar smiled politely. "Thank you, sir. May I speak to the students?" The children gathered in the assembly room. They sat cross-legged on the floor, just as he once did. He looked at them, then began. "I am not smarter than you," he said softly. "I just never stopped asking questions." He told them about the radio, the kerosene lamp, the first time he saw a computer. "You may think the world is far from here," he said, "but the truth is, the world begins wherever someone decides to learn." Then, a boy in the back stood up. His uniform was worn, his shoes too big, but his eyes held something familiar, hunger. "Sir," the boy asked, "when you were our age, did you ever think someone like you could lead a company like Google?" Sundar paused. His throat tightened. The question felt heavier than all the interviews, presentations, or speeches he had ever given. He stepped down from the podium, walked to the boy, knelt beside him. "No," he said honestly, "I didn't." "Why not?" the boy asked. "Because no one around me looked like the kind of person the world puts on posters. We didn't speak the right English. We didn't wear the right clothes. We didn't know the shortcuts." "Then how did you do it?" Sundar smiled. "By believing that my questions mattered, even when no one was listening, and by remembering that it's okay to take longer. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to begin slow." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "One day, when someone laughs at your dream, just smile and keep going." The boy nodded. And in that small school with no air conditioning, no smartboards, no Wi-Fi, something extraordinary happened. A generation began to believe that they, too, could rise. Sundar returned to the US. The next day, he walked into the boardroom, stood tall, and said, "I accept." When he officially became the CEO of Google, headlines exploded. But Sundar didn't throw a press conference. Instead, he visited the cafeteria, sat beside a junior engineer, and asked, "What are you working on? Want to show me?" Because even at the top, he never forgot how it felt to be at the bottom. And he never stopped believing that the future belongs not to the loudest voice, but to the one that never gave up.